You'd imagine that big, massively expensive projects would start with an established plan. It just makes sense. After all, you wouldn't see a Hollywood production hire an A-list cast to gather them together on a film set and then start on the script. Well, apart from the Star Wars sequel trilogy, perhaps. And yet, it's true that some games, even famous AAA titles, only realised what they wanted to be halfway through development. Whether due to a change of lead director, a cultural shift, a loss of creative licenses, or just that somebody woke up one night with a bright idea, the games we're looking at today ended up in a very different place from their original intended destinations. Before we begin though, one caveat. We aren't interested in changes that happened in the very early concept stage, such as BioShock for example, which toyed with the idea of being about a cult deprogrammer. More information on that little nugget in our dedicated BioShock video, by the way, go check it out. No, we're interested in the ones that made big changes well after development was underway, right? Okay, let's go. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that changed drastically during development. Number 10. Mother 3. The Nintendo 64 didn't just have a controller that could make for an exceptional murder weapon, no, it was also the gateway for many franchises to step into a new world known as 3D. The likes of Super Mario, Donkey Kong, Mario Kart, and Wave Race all successfully made the jump, and according to their titles, they all did it in the 64th entry of their respective series. Astonishing coincidence and impressive longevity. Well done, Nintendo. However, there was another franchise that was going to join them in this third dimension. Mother. While many of you may not recognise the Mother series under its original moniker, In My Life, you may know Mother 2 by its Western title, Earthbound. The first two games in the Mother series were 2D turn-based JRPGs. The third entry though was to be in 3D and to release for the 64 DD, but considering that the add-on sold about as well as Christmas jumpers in a July heatwave, that plan fell through. Videos of the prototype can still be found, giving us a small window of insight into what the game could have been, but that version never saw the light of day. Instead, Mother 3 released in 2006 for the Game Boy Advance, completely rebuilt with the series' previous graphical style. It was Japan only though, meaning Western fans essentially got to miss out on the game twice. Sorry kids. Number 9. Uncharted 4: A Thieves End. The Uncharted series has always sought to answer the question, what would happen if every line of dialogue were a smug quip? And trust me, that's not a complaint from me. But the original plan for the fourth and potentially final adventure of one Nathaniel Montgomery Drake, that's definitely not his full name, I'm just making stuff up at this point, was going to be much darker than the crowd-pleasing action-adventure we ended up with. Going all the way back to 2013, the first teaser trailer for Uncharted 4 had a very different Sam Drake, then voiced by Todd Stashwick, seeking revenge on his brother. While the game we eventually got had the duo teaming up against the villainous Rafe, this trailer suggests that Sam was likely the intended antagonist. Now, that may not have been the case, we don't actually know for sure. Perhaps the fraternal team-up that we got had been the intention all along. But considering that the team changed completely during development and an alleged 8 months worth of content was scrapped, you've got to assume that, the plan had changed a bit. Number 8. Fortnite. Oh god, here we go again. I'm sure you've heard of Fortnite. It is, after all, absolutely everywhere. But to save from sounding like a jaded video game enthusiast angry at a new thing that the kids are into that we don't fully understand, let's just say that we aren't mad at Fortnite for being successful. We're just very old and confused. It'll happen to you. Fortnite is as popular as it is for two reasons: Battle and Royale. Royale. When PUBG appeared and began hoovering up all the world's monetary resources, Epic Games saw it and thought, oh yeah, I'll be having a slice of that, thanks very much, cheers. But while it would be understandable to think that this was the plan all along for Fortnite, it actually wasn't. You might be aware that there are actually multiple Fortnite games. While the free-to-play Battle Royale gets all the press, Fortnite Save the World is a separate team-based zombie shooter that was initially going to be the only version of Fortnite. But by the time the beta build of the game had been released, the team had decided to add the Battle Royale. What's mad though is that the idea to implement this came only a few months before the beta dropped, the actual development of the mode took less than 10 weeks, and now nobody involved with it will have to work a day in their lives ever again. Talk about striking gold. Number 7. Team Fortress 2, Akami, and Borderlands. Oh, watch out for this card, it's a wild one! Question for you. What do Team Fortress 2, Akami, and Borderlands all have in common? Go on, I'll give you a minute. No, you're not getting it. Alright, I'll tell you. All three started out with a realistic art style before swapping to the more unique looks we know today. Team Fortress 2 was going to be a gritty wartime shooter, perhaps the most believable of the three, but the idea that Akami didn't have a hint of its hand-painted aesthetic from the start is frankly shocking, and the thought of Borderlands looking more like Mass Effect or Gears of War makes me want to throw up a load of beautiful cel-shaded vomit. In all three cases, the change in style has certainly worked out for the best. No matter how good the more photorealistic art styles might have turned out to be, these games would all certainly be showing their age by now. But instead, we have three beloved titles that, as far as I'm concerned, get to enjoy eternal youth.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
Number 6. Halo Combat Evolved. Believe it or not, before the Microsoft acquisition of Bungie, Halo was in early development as a real-time strategy game. Partway into the prototype, after experimenting with a zoomed-in camera that meant you could follow your units from a third-person perspective, they decided it would be much more fun to be able to control the units directly. From this, development shifted, but still not to what we know today. No, the game then became a third-person shooter intended for release on the Mac, as you can see in this trailer from E3 2000. It was only after financial difficulties that Microsoft came through to acquire Bungie, pushing Halo as an Xbox launch title in the process. Still, an RTS Halo game did happen eventually, of course, in the form of Halo Wars, so you could say it's all come... it's all come full circle. Number 5. Shemu. Back in 1993, a little arcade game called Virtua Fighter appeared and revolutionised the genre by leaving the letter L out of a word. Oh, brilliant. Or should I say brilliant. Oh, also, it was fully 3D and the first of its kind in the fighting game genre. Well done on that too, I suppose. It went on to be a tremendous success both critically and commercially, so naturally there were a lot more Virtua games to follow. A spin-off that began development in 1996 would eventually be known as Virtua Fighter RPG Akira's Quest, but quite a way into development, the Virtua connection was dropped entirely, all names related to Virtua Fighter were replaced, and it changed shape to become Shemu. When you think about it though, it's probably for the best. Shenmue's ludicrous budget already resulted in it becoming a commercial failure despite its popularity, so just imagine how much more poorly it would have done if it were a spin-off targeting Virtua Fighter fans specifically. Instead of just bankrupting Sega, it could have bankrupted all of Japan. Number 4. Quake. There's actually a surprising link between the development of Quake and our previous entry. Yes, Quake also had a connection with Virtua Fighter. Sort of. The lead designer of Quake, John Romero, had envisioned the game having a strong focus on third-person melee combat, heavily inspired by Virtua Fighter. But obviously, it didn't work out like that for old Johnny Rom-Roms, with higher-ups scrapping the idea after development time and costs began soaring. Naturally, Jono Romero didn't take too kindly to this and left id Software shortly after Quake was finished. It was a good thing that the execs stepped in when they did though, as Quake went on to become an all-time genre-defining great. And it was happy endings all round really, as John Rom Rom eventually did go on to make the melee fighter of his dreams, Daikatana, which was a critical and commercial disaster. Oh, sorry, that's not a happy ending at all. So just think, if Jar Jar Binks got his way while Quake was being developed, you might not remember it at all today, or if you did, it wouldn't be with much fondness. Number 3. Conquerors Bad Fur Day. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Cutesy character platforms its way through a charming world full of collectibles. In the late 90s and early 2000s, you couldn't move for brightly coloured company mascots spin striking a stereotypical baddie. However, there was one that stood out from the rest for being rad and fresh and other words that young people use. Conquerors Bad Fur Day was famously, or infamously if you're of a sensitive disposition, a cartoony platformer that definitely wasn't for kids. The vulgar squirrel swore, drunk, and smoked his way into our hearts, and encountered all manner of interesting friends and foes alike, from a giant singing turd to an incredibly buxom flower, but it was almost not to be. The original plan for Conquer was to just be another child-friendly platformer, centered around a character first introduced in the splendid Diddy Kong Racing. However, masters of the genre, Rare, received criticism during development of Conquer, with claims that it looked nigh on indistinguishable from their earlier game, Banjo-Kazooie. Thankfully, they listened to the critics and went with the more adult direction Conquer is known for now. But if you did want to see what Conquer was like in the more carefree days before he became a rascal, you could try Pocket Tales for the Game Boy Color, which was developed in tandem with the earlier Banjo-like Conquer game. Though why you'd want to do that, I'm not entirely sure. Number 2. Croc Legend of the Gobbos. Doesn't Croc look awfully familiar? A green reptilian with big eyes and a sunny disposition. It's almost as if I've seen something very similar before. Oh yeah, Bronchi, the Bronchiosaurus from the SNES, that edutainment game made to teach kids about asthma. Oh, classic. I'm joking, of course. But seriously, Croc and the one you were actually all thinking of, Yoshi, do share a startling resemblance, and for good reason. You see, during the aforementioned Nintendo 64 boom, when every character under the Nintendo banner was destined for a 3D game with 64 in the title, Yoshi was going to have one too. The people at Argonaut Games, the studio that co-developed Star Fox, built an entire prototype centered around Yoshi. It was supposedly to be a hybrid of Super Mario World and Mario Kart, but starring the noble green steed that Mario kills whenever he wants to jump a bit higher. Nintendo were apparently very keen on the idea, with even Miyamoto expressing interest. However, Nintendo did what Nintendo does best, and backed out late. Sony. Philips. Spaghetti! Instead of scrapping their prototype outright though, Argonaut Games decided to make their own platformer centered around a jolly green chap. That's why we have Croc, that's why he looks a little bit like Yoshi, and that's why he's on the PlayStation. Although it still doesn't explain why he's got the turning circle of an oil tanker, Jesus Christ. And number 1, Resident Evil 4 and Devil May Cry. Because what else could we have chosen for the top spot? It's no secret that the Resident Evil series has a history of major development changes. After all, the first game was initially envisaged as a first-person shooter, and Resident Evil 2 started life as what we now refer to as Resident Evil 1.5, which was deemed to be too similar to the previous game at the time and received a complete overhaul. Resi 4 is the order of the day though, and it's perhaps no surprise given that it went through 4 different versions before settling on the one we know today. Crucially, the first iteration had an emphasis on the main character being cool, but considering that cool doesn't really fit the horror mold, they moved the entire project away from the Resident Evil brand and made it its own thing. That's Devil May Cry if you weren't paying attention to the title of this entry. Yes, the number 1 spot goes to a game that changed so much that it actually became a whole new franchise. Oh, talk about about missing the mark. How utterly embarrassing, Capcom, with your 2 hugely successful franchises that make you a shed load of money even today. Oh, but you're really red-faced now. After a few other cancelled attempts that saw a considerable amount of work cast aside, the team settled on the final version of Resident Evil 4,
one of the best video games of all time, don't at me,
as we know it today, thanks to 6 tough years of perseverance through chopping and changing. In fact, I'd say there's a moral here for all of you, if you'll allow me. If at first you don't succeed, go make Devil May Cry, and then work through several other iterations before settling on the one where you get chased by a giant statue. It's certainly a philosophy that served me well over the years, so just think about it, alright? See you later.